So, I've been working on a map recently by the name of DE Wet Market, and I was at the point where I was getting some feedback from some friends. I find that a second pair of eyes will sometimes find all the problems you missed with something you made, but I got conflicting feedback. I had one person tell me the map seemed too small, and another say it seemed too big, and a third person tell me that they couldn't decide if it was too big or too small. I wanted to know for myself exactly how my map compared to some other maps in the game. It was then that I remembered that about a month ago, I had watched a video by Uncle Dane, in which he finds the size in hammer units of the playable area in each map for Team Fortress 2. Team Fortress 2 and Counter-Strike both run on the same engine, which means the same method should work for both games, and luckily for me, it did, and Uncle Dane left a very hard-to-read and transparent set of instructions that I could follow to a T. I can't get the size in hammer units like he does because he uses a plugin for TF2 called Casting Essentials, but I can get a pretty accurate size comparison for CSGO maps anyways. The two console commands involved in the process are nav_flood_select and nav_chop_selected. For the uninitiated, bots use something called a Nav-Mesh to navigate maps. It's a collection of squares with lines in between them overlaid on the level that tell the bots where they can and can't go, and how to get there. They simply follow the connections between squares. Though it's possible to just compare the size of the Nav-Mesh files on the PC, in Uncle Dane's video he mentioned that sometimes there exists Nav-Mesh outside of the playable area. I didn't seem to find any in the places I looked in CSGO, but I figured I was better safe than sorry. After turning on SV cheats on a private server, I input nav_edit1, which brought the Nav-Mesh into view. Once I was there, I hovered my mouse over one of the Nav-Mesh boxes and typed nav_flood_select. This command selected all of the nav boxes that were connected to the one I was pointing at, selecting all of the boxes a bot could possibly get to. Then, typing nav_chop_selected will freeze the game for a bit of time depending on how much work it has to do. Then, cut what you have selected into equal-sized bits. According to the vague, hard-to-read bit on Uncle Dane's video, each one of these was about 24 by 24 hammer units, but since I couldn't confirm this, I just elected to stick with the number of boxes it created, which is displayed inside the developer console next to the amount of boxes that each map had originally. Once you've done this, you have a pretty accurate measure of how big each map's playable area is, with some margin of error. I walked around a couple maps to see if there were any glaring issues with this method, which kind of takes my frames, but at most it would miss 4 or 5 squares of space. If there are any FPS problems in the video, it's because running around while rendering a ton of squares isn't really optimized at all. Using this method, I was originally just going to compare my map to some standard ones and see where it stood in regards to size. But then I decided to keep looking and see where all the different maps currently in the game compared to each other in regards to playable space, and I found some surprising things. First of all, I'm going to get the obvious question that everyone's going to want to know out of the way. What is the biggest map in regards to playable space? Is it Overpass with its multiple levels and long open pathways? No. How about Assault with its massive warehouse and large outdoor areas? No. Is it Nuke with its multiple floors and really large player spawns? No. Perhaps Cache with its vast outdoor spaces? No, it's Lake. It's Lake by a lot. In regards to playable space, Lake is the biggest map by almost a factor of 2, having 27,307 squares compared to Cache's 14,496. It's insane how a demolition map, which is typically supposed to be smaller than a standard diffuse map, is so damn massive. But it's pretty obvious when you think about it because of its large playable space, very wide borders of the map, and the central house having 3 floors with an accessible roof. But it still caught me off guard, really, how massive Lake was. You serious? Lake better not be the biggest map. Holy shit. It's not even a contest. The demolition map bank was also pretty large, coming in 6th in regards to overall map size at 12,789. The smallest maps were the Wingman exclusive maps, Short Dust, Short Nuke, and Rialto, all 3 coming in at less than 5,000 squares. I couldn't find data for the other Wingman maps since they use a slightly modified version of the original I didn't seem to have access to, and didn't want to spend the time trying to get running on a private server. There were some other things I found pretty surprising too. Vertigo and Canals were the smallest diffuse maps, despite Vertigo's wider areas and multiple floors, and Canal's long open pathways. They were 8,404 squares and 8,455 squares respectively. I expected both of these maps to be among the largest diffuse maps, but maybe I've just been looking at them wrong. I certainly didn't expect them to be hardly half the size of Cache. Train 2 was only 8,568, a number that was so hard for me to believe that I had to run around the map at 12 FPS to verify that everything was being included. The smallest classic comp map in the game, though, is Italy at a tiny 7,802 squares. That's almost a quarter the size of Lake's playable area. Diffuse maps in the game averaged out at about 10,908 squares. That's a size closest to maps like Anubis and Safe House. Hostage maps averaged out only slightly lower at 10,562 squares, which is essentially the same size and still most comparable to Safe House. My map I'm working on, Wet Market, came out to be about 9,914 squares for anyone who was still wondering, which is somewhere in between Mirage and Cobblestone, meaning I'm A-OK. Arms race maps are, as you'd expect, tiny. The largest is Monastery at 7,281. Even with its many floors and roofs, it still doesn't manage to be larger than Italy. The smallest is Lunacy, which even though only has 5,150 squares of playable space, interestingly had a Nav-Mesh about the size of Nukes or Dust 2 in regards to file size. I hope my efforts into the game have been interesting for you. I'll leave you with some closing graphs for each game mode so that you can see where every single map stands in regards to size. I hope you enjoyed this more than I enjoyed collecting the data, although it was interesting to look through what maps are in the game. I forgot what Militia looked like, and I'd totally forgotten about Dizzy until it had finished loading. I thought it was a map that they had just added and I hadn't heard of before. On a bit of a closing note, I didn't do any measurements for the Danger Zone maps because I was worried that my computer would take upwards of an hour to measure them, so if anyone else wants to handle that, then by all means go ahead. I've left the instructions in this video. Anyways, thanks for watching. I don't usually do videos like this, so if there are quality problems, sorry, but I just figured that I wanted to get this information out there because I found it pretty interesting. Thanks for watching.